The studio lights were too bright, too polished, reflecting off the glass table like they had something to prove. For people sat in a neat line, each mic'd up, each with a carefully folded note card in front of them. This was supposed to be a panel about economic recovery in low-income communities. But anyone who's watched these live debates knew that subjects were just suggestions. Senator JD Vance was already talking, already performing. Leaning into his mic, fingers dancing like he was conducting a silent orchestra of smugness. His brow furrowed in practiced concern, lips twitching into a smirk that didn't quite hide the condescension. "Let's be serious," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Throwing money at bad schools and calling it reform? That's not progress. That's pandering." Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat silent, measured. She'd done this enough times to know how it went. Let the white men talk themselves into a corner, then hand them the facts like a blade too sharp to ignore. When she finally leaned forward, her voice was steady. "If by bad schools you mean underfunded, understaffed, and abandoned by the state," she said, "then yes. Let's throw all the money at them. Communities that have been robbed deserve repair." The host blinked, intrigued. JD scoffed. "You talk about handouts," she continued, "but what you really mean is if it doesn't look like your world, it doesn't matter. That's when it happened." "You're just being ghetto," JD said. Soft, almost playful, like he was seasoning the conversation with a little insult. The air left the room. It wasn't just what he said, it was the ease with which he said it. Like he'd been holding it in, waiting for a crack to slip it through. It landed like a brick thrown through a church window, deliberate, breaking something sacred. The other panelists froze. The host stared into the middle distance. Jasmine didn't flinch. She took a breath, adjusted her mic, and turned to face the camera. "I'm not surprised you said that," she began. "Because when black women speak with conviction, when we challenge power, we don't get to be assertive. We get labeled." JD shifted in his chair. "You hear ghetto," Jasmine said, "but I hear South Dallas. I hear survival. I hear my mother working 2 jobs, raising 3 kids, and still showing up to PTA meetings with food stamps in her purse and dignity in her walk." The moment cracked open like a thunderclap. Social media exploded before the segment even ended. Clips were already being stitched, subtitled, shared. Some called her a queen. Some said she should have walked off set. Black women everywhere simply said, "Thank you." But Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't fire back louder. She sat through the rest of the panel calmly, fingers tapping the table with quiet fury. She knew how it would be spun. She'd seen it before. A black woman shows emotion and suddenly she's angry. So she let her words, not her volume, carry the weight. But that moment, that fire, hadn't come from nowhere. Before she was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, she was Jazz from South Dallas. No bodyguards, no tailor-made suits. Just a skinny girl with scraped knees and calloused hands from helping her uncle change brake pads in the summer heat. South Dallas didn't offer encouragement. It threw you into the storm and dared you to learn how to swim. Sirens, bus brakes, raised voices, mamas yelling for their kids before the streetlights flicked on. Inside the house, her mama Marlene ruled with quiet thunder. She didn't need to yell. A look was enough. Marlene scrubbed other people's floors in Highland Park 6 days a week, then came home with bleach burns and just enough strength to cook chicken and rice before collapsing on the couch. Outside, Jazz was either too smart or not real enough. Her sneakers were knockoffs, a size too small. Her hair gel made her scalp itch. But she stood tall. The first time she was called ghetto wasn't on the playground. It was in 4th grade. A substitute teacher chuckled when she questioned a worksheet that said Martin Luther King's mission was accomplished. "Well, aren't you a little firecracker?" the teacher said. "Real ghetto fabulous." Jazz didn't even know what that meant. Not really. But she could feel the sting under the sugar. She told her mama. Marlene didn't storm up to the school. Didn't raise hell. Just looked her daughter in the eye and said, "Next time, finish your point, and say it louder." So Jazz joined the debate team. Not because she liked arguing, but because she was tired of needing a translator for her own damn truth. She learned how to land an argument without raising her voice. And it worked. People didn't always agree, but they listened. By the time she made it to Prairie View A&M, everyone knew Jazz. Not because she had the best clothes, but because she had the sharpest tongue and the heaviest truth. She carried South Dallas into every room. Into classrooms, courtrooms, eventually Capitol Hill. And she never, ever toned it down. 3 days passed, but the moment refused to fade. Not from social media, not from conversation, and certainly not from Jasmine Crockett's own mind. The clip had gone viral, sure, but what came next was not a flash in the pan. It was a current. One you couldn't scroll past. One you could feel. She hadn't planned to respond like this. She told her team, no press statement, no network interview. Not yet. What she needed wasn't a podium. It was space. Stillness. A moment to speak, not for the cameras, but for the people who saw themselves in her silence. So, Jasmine Crockett sat down in a modest, sunlit room, somewhere between exhaustion and resolve. No makeup artist. No media advisor. Just her, a wooden chair, a chipped ceramic mug, and a basic webcam. She hit record. "Before I say anything," she began, voice calm but grounded, "I want to be clear. I wasn't going to respond like this. But I've read your messages. I've felt your stories. And this moment, it's not just mine anymore." It wasn't a clapback. It wasn't a rebuttal. It was kitchen table honesty, the kind that sits beside you after the world just sucker punched you and says, "You good?" Her voice didn't rise. Her eyes didn't flicker. She wasn't performing. She was reclaiming. "I've heard words like ghetto, unprofessional, angry, my whole life," she said. "And I used to think if I dressed right, spoke softly, got the degrees, won the elections, those words would stop chasing me." She paused, let the silence stretch. But they don't. They just show up in new suits. Then came the line, the one that hit like gospel. "I wasn't offended because I've never been ghetto. I was offended because I have. And I know what that word means when you say it like that. It's not a label. It's a cage. A way to clip someone's wings before they ever fly." Within 2 hours, the video hit 1 million views. By sunset, it was being played in church youth groups, staff break rooms, college classrooms, barbershops. A group of nurses in Milwaukee streamed it on their lunch break. A high school teacher in Houston printed out quotes and handed them to her students. And then came the real shift. A text. No blue checkmark. No celebrity endorsement. Just a woman from Amarillo named Clarice. Attached was a screenshot of her 12-year-old daughter standing at their kitchen table, holding up a printed copy of Jasmine's quote. She said she's using it for her school speech. The message read, "Thank you for saying it out loud." Jasmine leaned back in her chair and finally exhaled, not because it was over, but because she realized it had begun. But not everyone was celebrating. On cable news and conservative radio, backlash began to hum, not yet a storm, but a steady drone. Talking heads accused her of weaponizing identity politics. Others mocked her for bringing up her background. As if pride in your roots was something to be embarrassed about. As if remembering where you came from was a weakness. Behind closed doors, the retaliation crept in. A congressional aide leaked that some lawmakers had been discussing her temperament. Another source whispered she might be too polarizing for future leadership roles. Jasmine wasn't surprised. She'd seen this dance before, in courtrooms, in political briefings, in boardrooms. Black women were never allowed to clap back. They were expected to absorb, endure, smile, and move on quietly. If they pushed back with facts, they were angry. If they smiled through it, they were performing. But Jasmine wasn't performing. She was surviving, and doing it publicly. Instead of going on national networks, she chose a small local news station in Fort Worth, where she used to visit her cousins during summers. She told her team, "This moment isn't just national. It's personal." When the anchor gently asked about the backlash, she didn't dodge. "I've been told my whole life that I'm too much," she said. "Too direct. Too passionate. Too loud. Too black. Too ghetto. And I'm done apologizing for any of it." She leaned in, not for drama, but for clarity. If that makes people uncomfortable, maybe they should ask themselves why. And while her words rang out across screens and classrooms, JD Vance stayed silent. At first. The next morning, he appeared on conservative talk radio and doubled down. Some people are too sensitive these days. If that's offensive, maybe politics isn't for her. He tried to spin it into strength, tried to wear insensitivity as armor. But something had shifted. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was culture. It was voice. It was recognition. By the end of the week, it wasn't just the voters who were watching. It was sponsors. A university in Oregon quietly canceled his speaking engagement. A tech conference in Seattle removed him from its keynote panel. One organizer even tweeted, "We can't ask black women to speak on our stages," and then turn around and host someone who disrespects them like that. His team scrambled. They issued a vague, 3-line statement. Senator Vance respects all his colleagues and regrets any misunderstanding. But the damage was done. Because it wasn't just about hurt feelings. It was about the system that allowed one word to carry the power to shrink someone, and the rare moment when that word didn't work. Behind the scenes, Republican colleagues felt the heat. In one closed-door meeting, a senior advisor reportedly said, "You made it harder for all of us. This isn't going away." And then, something rare happened. 2 Republican lawmakers, both men, both careful, issued public statements. They didn't name JD. But their message was clear: respect matters. Language matters. Tone matters. It wasn't a tidal wave. But it was enough to let the ground beneath him begin to crack. And still, Jasmine didn't gloat. No memes. No retweets. No demands for apology. She stayed on message. She kept working. So when a reporter asked her during a Capitol hallway scrum if she had anything to say to JD Vance, she looked up from her folder, smiled faintly, and replied, "I already said it. And I said it the first time, with clarity." Then she walked away. But the ripple didn't stop at the Capitol. In classrooms, in barbershops, in family group chats, the conversation had changed. And Jasmine? She wasn't just being watched anymore. She was being heard. The moment simmered for months. It was no longer about the insult. That was just the match. The fire it lit, though, that was about something deeper. About who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and who gets to take up space without apologizing for the weight of their voice. Jasmine Crockett kept showing up. To committee meetings. To classrooms. To communities that had started watching her like a mirror. She didn't pivot. She didn't soften. She just kept walking forward with that same mix of fire and grace. So when the invitation came, same network, same glass table, same co-panelist, her team paused. "You don't owe them anything," one aide told her. "You already made your point." But Jasmine didn't see it that way. "This isn't about him," she said. "It's about every girl still watching." And so, nearly a year to the day since JD Vance tried to reduce her to a label on live television, Jasmine Crockett walked into that same studio, not to relive the moment, but to redefine it. She wore a burnt orange suit. Sharp lines. Bold color. No apologies in sight. Her hair was styled in tight coils, pinned back just enough to show the small gold studs in her ears. There was no dramatic walk-on, no rehearsed smile. Just presence. Command. A woman who had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. The segment was supposed to be about national housing policy. That was the safe topic on the run sheet. But everyone in that room, and every viewer at home, knew why the cameras were really rolling. JD Vance was already seated, flipping through notes. He kept glancing sideways as she sat down. Not hostile, just waiting. For a performance. For a second round. For a fight. But Jasmine? She wasn't interested in fireworks. She came for the conversation. As the panel began, she held her ground with quiet command. She broke down the numbers. She traced the policies to real consequences. When JD interrupted, she didn't flinch. When he deflected, she didn't chase. Her voice never rose. But her words? They hit like anvils. And then, right when the panel was wrapping, JD leaned forward. "Look, Congresswoman Crockett," he said, voice tight with condescension. "I'm sure your community cares, But I don't think turning this into an emotional issue helps anything. There was. Not as sharp as ghetto. Not as loud. But just as cutting. Just as coded. Dismissive. Patronizing. A cleaner insult, but the same attempt to silence. Jasmine took one breath. Not the kind you take before a blow-up, but the kind you take when you're about to plant your feet. You keep calling it emotional, she said evenly. When I talk about housing. Because you've never had to live next to a payday loan shop and a liquor store instead of a grocery store. You think it's emotional. I think it's lived experience. Silence fell. The host shifted in his seat. JD leaned back, visibly rattled. He opened his mouth to respond, but found nothing waiting. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. The clip hit social media in under 10 minutes. But this time, it wasn't the confrontation that stuck. It was the stillness. The way she didn't raise her voice. Didn't flinch. She just refused to be erased. Later that night, back in her DC office, Jasmine scrolled through her messages. One stood out. A father from Missouri had written, "My daughter watched your segment tonight. She told me she wants to be the kind of woman who speaks the way you do. Firm, calm, and clear. Thank you." She read it twice. Because this had never been about winning a spat with JD Vance. It had always been about something bigger. About changing what power looks like. About reshaping who gets to be taken seriously. About showing people that grace isn't weakness, and composure doesn't mean silence. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just defended herself. She had rewritten the rules of the room. Not by shouting louder, but by refusing to be small. 2 weeks later, she stood in a gymnasium in Tulsa, Oklahoma. No press. No cameras. Just rows of high school girls, some leaning forward, some half listening, some twirling braids or checking their phones. But Jasmine knew young people can smell a performance a mile away. So she didn't give them one. "I'm not here to be the famous lady from TV, she began. "I'm here because I've been where you are. Sitting in a room where no one thinks you're listening." That got their attention. She told them about South Dallas. About being talked over in courtrooms. About being called too much in every room that didn't know what to do with a woman like her. And yes, she told them about that moment on live television. A girl near the back raised her hand, half smirking. "How'd you not cuss him out?" she asked, more admiration than sarcasm in her tone. Laughter rippled through the gym. But Jasmine just smiled. "Because I wasn't talking to him," she said. "I was talking to you. To every girl who's ever been told to speak softer, be less, smile more. If I had exploded, they would have ignored my words and focused on my volume. So I gave them words they couldn't ignore." Another student, Isabel, asked what she would say to her younger self. Jasmine paused, looking at the rows of faces, different shades, different stories, same quiet hunger. "I'd say, respect isn't something you chase by changing who you are. It's something you claim by standing exactly as you are." They clapped. Some stood. But Jasmine wasn't chasing applause. Afterward, as students gathered around the snack table, one girl approached quietly. Her name was Kiara. No phone out. No selfie request. Just a notebook clutched to her chest. "I write poems," she said. "But I stopped. Someone told me my writing sounded too ghetto." Jasmine took the notebook, flipped through the pages. They were raw. Honest. Beautiful. "Kiara," she said softly, "if that's what ghetto sounds like, then the world better listen up." They hugged. No cameras caught it. No hashtags trended. But that was the moment Jasmine had come for. That night, on the flight back to Washington, she thought about the word again. A word meant to hurt. To reduce. To box in. To shame. But it had sparked a conversation that people could no longer avoid. Respectability politics had always been a tightrope. Dress right. Speak right. Smile right. And maybe you'd get a seat at the table. But what if the table was never built for you? What if every time you reached for respect, you were asked to trade in your truth? That's what JD Vance never understood. His insult wasn't about style. It wasn't about tone. It was about identity. About trying to make her shrink. But she didn't. She stood taller. And when she did, others stood too. Not because she had power, but because she gave something rarer. Permission. To speak like yourself. To dress like your mama taught you. To bring your full self into rooms that were never designed for you. And to hold your space without apology. So the next time someone watches a woman like Jasmine Crockett, unapologetic, unfiltered, and full of fire, and thinks she's being too much, they might remember that moment, that line, that presence, and finally understand that's not too much. That's what real leadership looks like.